Hello, and thank you for joining me. I want to talk about the issue of penal abolition as a concept. Um, it may sound like hyperbole, but there are actually people out there, when you come across debates on crime, who really do seem to insinuate that is their proposition. Um, because when people start saying things like, oh, I don't like the idea of prison, prison doesn't work, and they make these sort of sweeping statements. The follow up is that is a position of penal abolition. And if it's not, I think they should be more clear that it's not. Well, what I'm going to be saying in this video, I'm extremely biased. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I think I'm looking at this from a point of absolute common sense. Namely, that getting rid of prison would be incredibly stupid, reckless, and just plain wrong. Um, I must admit, I have to grit my teeth when I see this sort of mentality, this sort of attitude from certain people, because I think that they are showing astonishing naivety. Here's the thing: in any sort of debate, whatever the issue, you're going to get back and forth on issues like statistics. Now, statistics are important, of course. International comparisons are important. I don't reject that as a debate approach, but on the issue of crime, and I'm thinking here of serious crime. Yeah, I'm not talking about someone steals a chocolate bar from a shop. I'm talking about serious crime that really impacts the victims. So things like child murder, or any murder for that matter, particularly child murder, but any murder. Um, Convicted pedophilia, where there has actually been the active touching of a child, active child molesting, arson, and there have been arson cases in the UK where entire families have been killed, convicted terrorists, gang rape, and cases of gangs beating an individual to death. Now, those sort of crimes, in my view, are so heinous, so destructive, that I can't even begin to understand the mindset of someone who would attempt to elicit sympathy for such people. And if you're coming from a point that prison's a bad thing, prison should be abolished, then the extension of that argument is that those extreme cases, such people convicted in a court of law of those crimes, should not be behind bars. Now, I find that staggering. I find that utterly staggering. Even if you haven't been a victim of serious crime, common sense dictates that it is not clever to allow a dangerous person to be free. I am prepared to listen to arguments about problems in prison systems. And again, there's international comparisons to be made. I think the American system is deeply flawed. And here in the UK, we are seeing problems with overcrowding. There are serious problems. Serious unrest has been reported, and it's been described as a tinderbox. But the answer is not to abolish prisons. The answer to me, it seems, build more prisons. Now, those who I'm disagreeing with in this outlook will say, oh, that's an awful response because prisons aren't working. But building more prisons is in everyone's interest. It relieves the pressure on prison staff. It relieves the pressure on inmates because, clearly, if you have three people to a cell, it's more humane than having seven people to a cell. Or even if you have one to a cell, is more humane than having three to a cell. Yes, it would be a cost, but if it reduces the tensions in prison, reducing an environment where people become brutalized, then it saves cost overall because it increases the level of or it prevents the likelihood of reoffending. Now, that is a major issue, and clearly we have a long way to go in terms of stopping reoffending. But those who have the reactionary attitude, oh well, therefore the problem is prison, I think that's stupid in the extreme, and it makes me very angry because if you are for penal abolition, you're against justice. I think it's an extreme position. Um, Put it this way: I've never had a loved one murdered, but if I had, and someone said to me, "Oh well, I'm sorry for your loss, but the person who killed your loved one, they shouldn't be in prison because prison's not a very nice place," I think I would see red, to be quite honest. But on the issue of international comparisons, they often point to the Nordic countries and to the Netherlands. The Netherlands apparently is closing prisons because it has so few people incarcerated. Now, there's a few fallacies with Lee's argument. Firstly, it presents the situation of the Nordic countries being a kind of utopia where there is no violent crime. And I think that narrative is very misleading. For one thing, there has actually been an increase in violent crime in places like Malmo in southern Sweden. One of the major issues there is mass immigration. It can't be avoided. There is a correlation there. That doesn't mean that every immigrant is a criminal, and it doesn't mean that all Swedes are innocent. There's Swedish criminals as well. I'm not for a second trying to make some sort of ethno-national statement, but again, common sense comes into this. Um, and I find it very unfortunate that these issues can't be discussed because of the stigma of racism. But in terms of international comparisons, so yeah, there's this outlook that the Nordic countries are this utopian social democratic paradise. What I would like to hear, I mean, we hear all the propaganda about that, and I have no doubt that the average place in Sweden is probably a lot safer than many American cities. Um, Fair enough. Okay, I accept that Sweden probably does have overall low crime levels overall. But like I say, I wouldn't take that with a pinch of salt because it depends how these things are measured. But look at another country that has very low crime levels, Japan. That's right, Japan. Why is it those who have an extremely liberal outlook on the issue of crime never quote Japan when they talk about low crime levels? Now, Japan is not a dictatorship, so you can't say, oh well, but it's because it's thieves get their hands chopped off. It's has the death penalty, but it's also got a very tough penal system. I'm not going to say that it's devoid of human rights issues, but the fact is Japan has low crime rates. So if you're going to talk about the Nordic model and the ultra lenient approach that they take as, oh well, that's a great thing because it means low crime rates. Well, the same argument can be made, well, let's look at Japan. They have low crime rates. So if we're looking at international comparisons, why don't we copy Japan? So really, it's an ideological argument that they're making, more than a practical one. They agree with the social democratic, neo-lenient approach, which is the right. We have freedom of opinion. That's a right to agree with that, but it's ideological, um, because they, as they say themselves, are not comfortable with prison. They don't like the idea of it. They think it's dystopian and inhumane. Here's the thing: I don't want brutal prisons. I take no pleasure from reading that a young inmate has taken their life. That's not a good thing. But what I find even more repugnant is the idea that you could have a thug who has committed a heinous crime and who may serve a bit of time, but they then get an early release because of some fluke in the system. Uh, or the excess leniency of a judge. We see far too many cases of serious crimes going unpunished. I mean, penal abolition advocates say, oh, our answer is just to throw people in prison. Actually, a lot of serious violent crimes don't result in custody, especially when it's being committed by women. There was a case recently, there was a transgender individual pushed a police officer on a London Underground train. It was incredible that he didn't get killed. She escaped prison. Now, and there's other examples that are similar. I think that, we could talk about all the statistics and all that sort of thing. That's important. We could talk about recidivism. We could talk about cutting reoffending. We could talk about treating mental illness. All those things are important. But what penal abolitionists can't seem to grasp is a basic idea of fairness. Their whole mindset is, oh, well, that doesn't work, so let's do this. But how about fairness? They have nothing to say about fairness. So if someone stabs someone for looking at them the wrong way, fairness dictates that person should be held to account. It's just common sense. And I think they believe that the idea of fairness is some sort of nonsense. That they don't think it's part of justice. I would say they don't believe in justice, but then I'll be accused of whatever. But I I can't begin to understand the logic of people who have this outlook. I just don't understand how you can be so stupid to think that closing prisons will somehow help society. Sure, inmates will be happy about it, and some of them might not reoffend, but you cannot allow a dangerous person who has a track record of violence to just wander the streets. It's madness. It's utter madness. Whatever problems we have now, abolishing prison would make it 10 times worse. It would be anarchy. And I'll round it up there. I just think, I mean, people will retort, no one's actually advocating abolishing prison. But that's the thing. I believe that they really are. When you really dig deep into it, when you push them and ask that straight question, do you believe in the abolition of prison? Yes or no? Not, oh, I don't like prison. Do you believe in the abolition of prison? Yes or no? If they were honest, and I don't think they would be, because they would know the perception is that it's a stupid idea. But if they were brutally honest, they would say, yes, I believe in the abolition of prison. And then their fallacy would be exposed because it is a fundamentally unworkable, stupid, and plain, in my view, morally misguided idea. Certainly, I'm open-minded in terms of talking about improving prison conditions, in terms of cutting reoffending and all those issues. But what I have no respect for is the idea that prison in itself is somehow a bad thing. Prisons have always been used for human civilization, and they do serve a purpose. Some systems are better than others. There's huge variation. I don't believe there's any perfect system anywhere. But what I would want to see is a prison system that is tough but humane. I don't want to see super lenient Nordic style prisons, but nor do I like the idea of overly cramped prisons in parts of Latin America and Southeast Asia, where you have 100 people in a cell. That is inhumane in my view. I don't take any pleasure from that. So I'm not of the view of, oh, flog him and hang him. But in the end of the day, if you cannot bring yourself to feel any anger at a child killer, there is something seriously wrong with you.